Some people have already gotten in touch with me, and so I have a list, and we'll just go through as many as we can. So
That's
first
great.
up is Minnie.
Um, Someone can go before me if they want. I just lost my document because my internet was acting up, so now I'm trying to find that. So someone else can go before me.
Okay. How about Rachel? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, go for it.
I sit in my bed coughing. It's 2:05. What would I be doing if I were in school? Probably art or science. Or maybe if I weren't always out sick, I would have a friend who would be passing notes to me right now. Or maybe I would be slipping a note into her locker. It's a nice day out. The sun is shining and the birds are chirping, and the world around me is always perfect. Oh, the world around me is perfect, like it always is. I lost my place. Oh, I shut my eyes and go to sleep. Someone is calling my name. I jerk away from the unexpected cold hands that are shaking me. I wheeze. My brother flinches. I look up at him, confused. Why is he in my room? He's always afraid of catching any kind of sickness from me. What are you doing in here? I ask him. We have to get out of here, he says. Why? I ask. All I know, he said, is that there's a war and we need to get away from it.
Great. So, okay, a few things about that story. It begins in the world is very sunny. It begins in the subjunctive mood. There's a kind of imagination that's going on. The main character is sitting, pondering what might be, thinking about a kind of theoretical life, imagining what might be happening if she were in school, etc. The day is described as perfect as usual, very nice day. Then suddenly this weird thing happens where the protagonist closes the eyes, but we're not sure if that means the protagonist is falling asleep or not. And then the tone shifts, the light changes to dark. A brother comes into the room, which is described as an unusual event. And then the tone totally changes. The brother is very frantic. We need to get out of here. There's a war going on. So there's multiple kind of veerings going on, multiple changes, a tonal change, an atmospheric change, a descriptive change. So a change in tone and also in action. It's very great. I'm interested to know where that story might go. Thank you for sharing.
All right. Ismini, are you ready now?
Yes, just found it. Okay, so I don't have a title or anything. Here we go. So some of the facts in here might be a little bit inaccurate because I'm talking about a test I've never actually taken. Your time starts now. The teacher at the front of the room starts the 180-minute timer. We all hurriedly flip over our papers. Every student in this room has gone through incredible amounts of training and practice tests and hard work to get to this point. This test will now determine the fate of the rest of our lives. I hunch over my SAT, sweat dripping from my forehead. The only sound that fills the room is the incessant scratching of number 2 pencils on paper. I stare at the words on the sheet in front of me, fighting to make them appear as anything but the dyslexic jumble of nonsense they usually appear as. Concentrate, I mentally hiss at myself. I will not fail. Minutes seem to pass like seconds. I look up at the timer. 1 hour. Only 1 hour left to complete what will likely be the most important test I ever take. I furiously begin reading the next question, fighting the urge to let my eyelids fall and allow fatigue to fully consume my senses. A sudden burst of adrenaline rushes through my body, and I sprint through another 5 questions with renewed vigor. 30 minutes left. A sudden burning starts in my shoulders. I hunch over my paper, ignoring it to the best of my abilities. 5 minutes left. A test proctor walks by, staring pointedly at my messily scribbled in bubbles. A fire seems to burn through my back. Just 5 minutes left. And time's up. Everyone, please bring your papers to the front. I lurch to my feet. My breathing is labored, and I feel as if I might combust from the pain. Biting my tongue to keep from crying out, I rush to the front to hand in my paper. Turning, I race towards the bathroom. Hey, no running in the hallways, a proctor calls out as I race by. The irony of the statement hits me. I, a 17-year-old, am being reprimanded for running in a hallway. I almost chuckle before doubling over in pain. Curling in on myself, I push into a bathroom stall. I let out a whimper and tear off my shirt. Glancing in the mirror, I let out a small gasp in shock. Though physical education had never been my strength, I know basic human anatomy, and I could tell that something was wrong with my back and shoulder muscles. My bones seemed to jut out in strange shapes. Lifting a finger, I slowly prod my tender skin. Another gasp. I can feel my muscles shifting and new skin growing. Though I might not be an anatomy whiz, I know my fantasy. Amazement and wonder spread across my features. I'm growing wings.
Great, thank you. That's wonderful. So there are, again, at least two kinds of veering in that story. The scene opens with very tense test-taking atmosphere. There are some really wonderful details that I wanted to highlight in that story. The pencil scribbling contributes to a kind of frantic tension. You use the word fighting, so that the person who is taking the test, the protagonist taking the test, is described as fighting. So there's a kind of fighting against the test itself. We get the counting down of the clock, which functions as a kind of doomsday clock. There are these are some of the words that you use: burning, fire, labored, lurch, rush, race, gasp, shock. So all of these words kind of contribute to this kind of frantic environment. But the irony then is that the most dramatic thing happens not in the atmosphere of tension, not in the moment of the actual test taking, but afterwards in solitude, in kind of calm, when the protagonist relaxes and breathes deeply, and then notices herself to be sprouting these wings. So there is indeed a tonal shift from the environment, the classroom environment, to the bathroom environment, but it's also a plot shift. And what's interesting is that it's completely surprising how taking a test produces wings. So there's a plot connection between these two seemingly unrelated events. So then, I have to go back as a reader and wonder what it is about the act of test taking, the act of proving oneself to the world. And it's also very surprising because you have this moment where you say, this is the test that will define the rest of our lives. And indeed, it seems that the test will define this person's life, but not in the way we expect. Not in any way that has to do with profession, careerism, maybe what kind of school this person will go to. No, it is instead a very physical metamorphosis produced by the test. So it's really great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Sorry if there's any inaccuracies. I don't actually know how the SAT is formatted. I just know it's 180 minutes since I Googled that. So
yeah, I would say it's pretty accurate.
I think when you take it as mini, it's going to be on a computer now.
yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. Great. Yeah, thank you, Ismini.
Okay, let's go to Olivia Z now.
SAT and he didn't have a computer. He had to go in person.
Okay.
For study now, okay, I don't really have a title for this, but Sarah smiled at no one in particular, the wind whipping her hair around. She climbed up the rocky cliff, over thick shrubs, and stood before a cave which overlooked the sandy strip of a beach. Some families, including hers, were gathered on. Sarah stepped inside the cave, embracing the coolness and dampness and quietness of it. Silence only disturbed by the sounds of trickling water. A soft wind blew. A heat wave coursed through the cave, hotter than the microwave at Sarah's house. She felt her lungs tightening, her body swelling, then shrinking rapidly. Her hands and feet strapped to her side, morphing into fins. Sarah stared, horrified. She couldn't say anything, not to mention yell for help. She was a fish. And that was it. It's kind of short.
No, it's great. Thank you. I love the story. I actually love its brevity, and I love how the story does not explain any further the situation of the protagonist. So again, we have a kind of atmospheric veering. The character quite literally veers into a cave to escape the wind, the rocky cliffs, perhaps the terrain that the protagonist finds herself in, and then does not find shelter in the cave, but finds instead a kind of physical transformation. It's also great how the cave is suddenly silent, how the temperature changes in the cave, and then without explanation, we have a fish. I think it's really great. Yeah, thank you, Olivia, for sharing that.
All right. Next up is Julia.
Okay, so mine is a continuation of my last story. So here, let me see. As I said, no one noticed the boy except for a girl who was in fact about 10 years old. The young girl walked around the alley waiting for the boy to come out. Finally, she called into the alley saying a word with a weird pronunciation. It sounded like a screech or a croak or a bird call, but nobody cared about what she was saying. If you were actually listening, you could hear an oh no slip out of her red lips, and then you could see her face frown for a moment, and then mumbled something. She called again, waiting for a reply, and then said it sounded like a whine. At last she spoke English. I'm going now, Matthew. This is the last warning. This man is coming, she said. Then, with a frown, she turned on her heel and walked into a different alley.
Will you just read that last sentence again, Julia? Just the last 2 or 3 sentences.
Then, with a I'm going now, Matthew. This is the last warning. Miss Men is coming, she said. Then, with a frown, she turned on her heel and walked into a different alley.
So here we have a kind of veering that we have not seen yet, a change of mind, a physical leaving, going away, a proclamation of leaving, and so forth. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So is that a story that you started last week?
Yeah, I read it last week.
Okay, and then this is the moment, the veering away, or the change of direction that you've written today. Great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, there's also some really great imagery in the first few sentences as well. Thank you for sharing, Julia.
All right. Let's hear from Sierra next.
Okay. Her gray eyes were beyond gloomy. Just stealing a glance at her was depressing. At dawn, she would dress, leave her mouse-hole-sized, dusty apartment, and descend the creaking metal steps, carrying her sorrow to the world outdoors. She'd stumble down the bleak streets, casting sadness all around her. And even when her small, vulnerable figure would reach the always foggy seaside promenade, she'd heave a sigh and sit on the same cold stone bench. Others made an effort to avoid this woman. She was shrouded in mystery and had lost her energy in only a split second. A few of the townsfolk had known her as an animated, brilliant friend, but she had long lost her charm. She used to pin magnificent daisies, roses, or dainty violets to her elegant, vibrant sundresses that had been abandoned for muted tones. She no longer bore a grin of cheeriness and satisfaction. It had all dissipated into thin air, a glorious person gone. The town had fallen into a somber mood. Conversations were limited to pleases and thank yous. Each quaint shop's light would flicker off one night, at some point or another, and it would never turn on again. This concluded the liveliness of the village. That one woman, she had burned out the candle forever. One by one, in a matter of only weeks, the population of the town decreased to 0. Or so the residents thought. The woman, the haunting, mystifying woman, remained. It was dusk. A shady woman stood up from a cold stone bench on the seaside promenade. The wind lashed fiercely at her dark hair. Her frayed jet black coat was the color of the sky. The waves crashed against the marble railing that separated land from sea, and she marched home, a vengeance in her step, a hidden sadness beneath fury in her gray eyes.
Great. Okay, so I have a couple things to say about the story. It's a very interesting, formally, it's a very interesting story. So what we get is a transformation of character that has occurred retrospectively. We're told about a woman who is gloomy. We get a description of an atmosphere that is dusty, metal, bleak, sad, stony, foggy, cold. But then we are told in the past tense that this character used to be glorious, that she has lost her energy, lost her charm, but we're never told why. So we never get the event of transformation. We never understand why it is that this woman has lost her charm, her energy, why she is a glorious person gone. And so we are left then as readers to wonder about why this is the case. So essentially we get an atmosphere without a narrative. It's very interesting formal creation, I think. That's very great. Thank you for sharing, Sarah.
So I have a theory of why she might have lost her energy.
Okay.
Like maybe someone close to her died or something.
Yeah, that could be very possible. I mean, but one of the reasons why I like the story so much is because it leaves ambiguous the source of her sadness. There's also just two really great moments that I wanted to point out. That there's a moment where you say that her coat is the same color as the sky, as the gray sky. So the kind of conflation between the gloomy atmosphere and the person. And then you have this moment where you describe the sea crashing between, or the waves crashing between the ocean and the land. So you understand that we as readers are occupying this kind of weird in-between zone, where we don't fully have, we don't have the beginning and we don't have the ending of the story. We occupy this very strange middle ground. It's great.
All right. So technically this is the end of the workshop. So if you have to leave, thank you for joining us. But I think we'll stay a little bit after to hear a few more stories. So you are welcome to stay as well. And next up is Liam.
I sat on the porch where I always sit, wringing sweat from my hands and squinting through the shimmery hot air. Across the street, Miss Reynolds scurried around her front yard in a frilly sun hat, undaunted by the suffocating heat and painted like a tribal warrior. Sunscreen unceremoniously streaked across her shriveled old skin. Above the both of us, a clear day was speckled with wisps for clouds, and the sun spread its warm embrace across the blue sky like something straight out of the Toy Story intro credits. From a distance, I could briefly make out the deafening rumble of the trucks as they passed by, their tail ends dragging across the gravel, stereos blasting with hard rock that shook our windows, drivers screeching, whooping, laughing as they went along. Miss Reynolds only briefly acknowledged the din with a deep scowl that spread fault lines of wrinkles across her face before returning to her garden with a new urgency. She crossed the crinkled brown grass quickly on shaky legs, water swishing from her can and gathering in brown puddles as she went, ripping through stands of poppies and rosemary bushes that I knew she'd been fostering for years, decades even. At her age, centuries weren't even out of the question. Miss Reynolds, I called questioningly. What's, you okay over there? Alarmed, her gray eyes shot up from beneath the brim of her gardening hat, searching my face as if she'd forgotten I was there. Young uns, she cursed under her breath. No sooner did she resume her frantic disassembly of the front garden. young'uns and their gunsins and their trucksins. Nobody's got my flowers, you see. Remember that, Velma. Remember that when they come. I bit my lip, leaning further back on my palms. I think it's better if you head back inside, I urged her. Cool down a bit. Gunsons and our trucksons, she chanted. It had become a sort of disjointed kind of song. They's a big uns and small uns and childens and wildens. I was just about ready to get up and call the dementia center for the 6th time this month, of course, when the rumbling picked up again. I tilted my head, trying to decipher the skull-crushing music through the jostling of the tires, through the scraping of bumpers along a low gravel road, through Miss Reynolds' mumbling, practically yelling now. The strangeness of it all finally worked some movement back into my stiff legs. I stumbled to my feet and tripped down the shallow front steps. Now, the noxious fumes of gas and exhaust were sharp and heavy over the street. Above us, the wisps of clouds, which hadn't changed one bit, looked somehow different to me. Those aren't clouds, I whispered to myself, panic fluttering into my chest. It's smoke, Miss Reynolds growled, having appeared, pressed up against the picket fence with a bundle of flowers and weeds tucked under her arms. She had no more time to explain before the sound of booming punk rock broke our hazy stillness, and a fleet of heavy-set trucks swerved through the tree line. Terrified, my gaze flew up to the plain, clear Toy Story sky, indifferently gleaming above the grumbling engines and blasting rock music, and somehow still beautiful despite how little it cared if I lived or died.
Wow. Okay, that's really great. There's so much to talk about, almost too much to talk about. I have written in my notes an entire page of things that I wanted to say about the story. So first of all, there's multiple. I mean, the whole story itself formally is constantly veering. So as a formal construction, the story, if you just see the story through the lens of the narrator, there's a constant veering between the sky, the kind of wispy clouds, which then become smoke. So that's one transformation. But the eyes are constantly looking up and then looking down at Mrs. Reynolds, and then looking around at the land. So there's this constant movement of the eyes. The eyes are never settling on any one thing. We get a constant shift in description between Mrs. Reynolds and the day and the sky and the clouds and the grass and the garden. So there's a moment where you use the phrase disassembling the garden, but there's almost a disassembling of movement in the story, so that the focusing descriptive eye is constantly moving around. I love the description of Mrs. Reynolds. The voice of that character is absolutely idiosyncratic, and I've never heard anything like it before. There's another weird kind of conflation between Mrs. Reynolds and the chant that she seems to produce, the youngins, etc. So there's this chant. She herself is creating a kind of chant, a disjointed song, a skull-crushing music, so that there's a conflation between the actual noises of the world, the sound of the trucks, the sound of the rock music that is bumping up against and clashing with the voice of this very strange character who is described as a tribal warrior, but what instead of face paint has sunscreen on her face. It's very interesting. It's very strange, and there's also like a kind of tonal veering where on one hand it's very funny, but also it's totally terrifying and strange. It is indeed a kind of disjointed song. It's really formally wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
All right. So let's go to Nami next. Is Nami still here, or should I move on to? Okay, looks like Nami's not here. Okay, is Perry still here?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Doesn't have a title
Peaceful nights, sitting by the ocean, resting on the shore, watching the moon's pull capture the waves and release them. Peaceful days, watching the tranquil silhouette of a dove as it overlaps from my angle with the sun. Serene sunrise, serene sunset, the breeze of summer dawn, or the chill of winter dusk. The sound of the seagulls, the salt of the seawater, overlapping with the same sound of spring, or the calm cool of autumn. But when you're bursting with anger and hate for humankind, sometimes the fury can't be drained by temporary peace, so I leave.
Great. Okay. So that functions formally in a very similar way to the poem that we read in the presentation called "Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's Farm" by James Wright, where you begin with a very kind of almost kind of picturesque pastoral description of this seaside landscape, salt and sea and seagulls. There's this kind of pull and release that's going on between the waves and the description itself. It's very pleasant. But then the speaker announces herself at the end of the piece and says, but all this serenity, all this peace cannot relieve me of my anger and my hatred. So it has that turn, that poetic turn at the end. It's great. It's great.
All right, let's go to Annie now.
Okay, so this is kind of a stream of consciousness. Hey Mom, I say, tugging at her sleeve. Did you know my birthday's in 2 weeks? She gasps. Time seems to have lost its value, but sometimes it catches up, like right now. It is, she says, which doesn't sound good. Yeah, I grin sheepishly, feeling like somehow I've done something wrong. What do you want for your birthday? Same as Christmas. She rolls her eyes. Anna, I'm not taking you to Switzerland, and we are not buying a house by the river in the British countryside. Get realistic. I groan. Okay, fine. The truth is, Switzerland is all I can think of these days. I seriously want to go there. The Alps, I mean. Why? Mountain goats, Heidi, snow, nice people, chocolate, sound of music. The full package. But my brother Ivan, on the other hand, is obsessed with Japan. He sings Japan, Japan, Japan when I've got my mind on Switzerland. I wouldn't mind going to Japan either, but at this point I just want to go somewhere. But I'm not. I sigh and sit down at the piano to practice. At this rate, my easiest chance of scoring a ticket to Switzerland is by getting invited to play at the Verbier Festival, which is a music festival in the Alps, I think. And I would have to turn prodigy to get into that, which I'm not. But never mind, at least I can dream. I flip my music open to Schumann and place my hands on the perfect ribbon of black and white, starting the G minor section where it sounds like Mendelssohn has just walked in the door. Quoting composers, that's so Schumann. Honestly, I prefer Brahms, but you've got to feel bad for old Bob. I mean, he probably had some serious bipolar. And once he went to the asylum to die, Brahms was like, oh, I honor my old friend Robert, so I'm not going to marry his wife. Instead, I'm going to visit her every day. I am so genius. You're accenting the middle of the phrase, Mom grumbles as she walks past me to the next room. As the door creaks shut behind her, I roll my eyes. I hate it when she tries to play music teacher with me. I jump to the part where Schumann starts quoting Chopin, or at least trying to. The trash truck rumbles by, beeping and squealing as it hauls up our communal recycling bin. I imagine the vase I broke yesterday clattering into the truck, the one that Mom made me throw away because apparently broken vases are bad luck, or so she says. Suddenly, I hear the phone ring in the next room. Probably another spam call. That's the downside of having a landline. I told Mom to get rid of it 2 years ago, but she wouldn't budge. I stop playing. I can hear Mom talking rapidly on the phone in Korean. She rarely talks in Korean to us, and she moved here when she was like 5. But who could she be talking to? I peer through the glass door, watching her twirl the phone cord restlessly between 2 calloused fingertips. After a minute, Ivan bursts in. Anna, you won't believe it. What? We're going to Switzerland? I say sarcastically. No, we're going to Korea. Harmony has stage 3 cancer, and we're going to see her. What? I gasp. But it suddenly seems like there's not enough air in the room. What? I think of Harmony, who used to live here with us when I was younger. I see her dark eyes, her wrinkled face, her hair dyed but streaked with white, conflicted with age. We used to sit on the bench in the park together, the one they tore down and replaced last year. She used to tell me Bible stories, but then Mom got mad at her for trying to turn me religious. A few years after that, Harmony moved back to Korea with her sister. Dad doesn't like her much, but I missed her. I miss her. And now? I slammed the lid shut over the piano keys, which seemed to laugh up at me. First, I'm furious with Ivan, who keeps staring up at me with that ridiculously happy grin on his face. Why the heck is he always so happy? And then I'm mad at myself. It's all my fault. I must have jinxed her or something. I should never have wished to go anywhere. It's all my fault, and there's no going back.
Wow. Okay. I am genuinely jealous that you have written that. That's really outstanding. So again, this is a very complex form of veering because it's not so much the narrative that veers or changes direction. It's not so much that the character experiences any kind of emotional or physical metamorphosis, but the form of that story itself is veering. It is, you describe it as stream of consciousness, and one of the things that stream of consciousness does is it constantly changes direction. So it never fully allows a reader to settle in to any primary narrative arc. So it moves around so fast and so beautifully. Its logic is the logic of poetry, a kind of associative logic, in some cases a sonic logic or the logic of sounds. Moving from this conversation about the birthday, and there's this brilliant moment at the very beginning where you're talking about time, and then you say, Annie, you say, time seems to have lost its value, but it catches up. Like right now, I don't have it word for word, but this is the moment. So time itself is catching up. So the story is this act of trying to catch up to time, or trying to understand time as it's happening in the immediate moment. I want really to comment on every single event. I wrote them all down. The movement from the birthday to the daydreaming about the Alps and Switzerland, to the kind of funny, abrupt shift to Ivan in Japan, then classical music, the truck, the phone, the mother speaking on the phone, Yvonne rushing into the room, and then the tragic realization of cancer and so forth. So there's so much going on in the story tonally. It's at once very funny. I mean, I was laughing the whole time. I thought it was very funny until the cancer moment, and then realized that this is a very serious story. So that's a major tonal shift. And then at the end, I found it to be very heartbreaking. And then there's this kind of irrational associative connection made between the cancer and the wish to go to Switzerland. That kind of that it's very illogical, and there's something kind of tragic in that realization. But I do love the line, "The Alps, I mean." It's wonderful. It's really great. The Alps, I mean. I won't forget it. The Alps, comma, I mean. Yes, it's really, really great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Annie. Let's have one more. Let's do Lindsay last.
Okay, so I don't have a title for this, but anyway. I look at the glass sculpture that my mother has sent me. It is a small flower shining in the light, the pink sheen of the petals mixing with the golden glow of the center. It is standing on my nightstand all alone, but it fills the whole space around it with its being. It has a light honey scent mixed with fresh pine. When I put it to my nose and sniff, I am filled with bright green forests, white-tipped mountains, sweet bubbling streams, and the sun casting its warm yellow shadow over all. It seems to smile, saying, "Come to me, I won't hurt you," in a voice too much like mother's. In a sudden movement, I grab it, throwing it to the ground, watching it shatter. I lean down, my face close to the flower that dared make a fake honey-sweet smile at me and whisper, "I'm done with you." Then I stand up and walk out the door, a smile playing at my lips.
Thanks, Lindsay. Will you just read the first sentence of the story again?
I look at the glass sculpture that my mother has sent me.
Okay, so the protagonist receives from the mother figure a glass sculpture. The sculpture is that of a flower. The flower then produces an entire imaginary world. The protagonist smells the flower. The smells are real. They seem to be real anyway. These smells then conjure up an entire pastoral landscape, the landscape of flowers, the natural world, etc. And then, of course, the turn comes when it seems as if the protagonist is enjoying this imaginary scene, this imaginary landscape, imagined smells, and then rejects them and casts the sculpture down, breaking it, leaves, and experiences a kind of glee in this rejection. So the reader then is left to wonder about what exactly has been rejected. Is it the sculpture itself? Is it the imagination? Is it the specificity of the imagined world that is produced by the sculpture? Does it have something to do with the relationship between the protagonist and the mother figure? There are many symbolic ambiguities in the story that I find to be very productive.
Is it like, is your mother dead or something?
Possibly.
And I was actually thinking somehow her mother abandoned her and went somewhere off to live live with someone or something.
So what's really
maybe the mother and the father divorced or something?
Sort of like that or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I really like about that story and what I find to be productive in it is the kind of ambiguity. So in that story, you don't really aim to address the relationship between the protagonist and the mother directly, but instead you choose to write about an object that exists between them, and the object becomes kind of emblematic or symbolic of that relationship in a way that is mysterious to us as readers. So yeah, thanks for sharing it. It's really great stuff. Very impressive work from the whole group.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Connor, and thank you for the really brilliant comments. It's nice and relaxing for me not to be doing them, and of course, you have a completely, a different approach, and I'm in awe of your critiquing is fabulous. I can't keep track at the level that you are. So thank you all. We'll see you next week for Madeline's presentation. Thank you. Goodbye.